A well-built train can last for decades, so long as its parts can be maintained and the fuel that powers it doesn't get banned or go out of fashion. A train that was built in 1970 can still work in the 2020s. Trains have extremely long service lives, but when they get to the end of those lives, they're generally scrapped and recycled. That doesn't happen to every train, though. Some of them manage to get themselves lost and abandoned, as you're about to see. If you know where to look in the woods of North Maine, USA, you'll be able to find a pair of abandoned locomotives from the age of steam. You'll have to drive down dusty old logging roads to get to them, but it's worth the trip if you're an enthusiast. These two full-sized locomotives once belonged to the Eagle Lake and West Branch Railroad, which operated in the area briefly between 1927 and 1933, serving the logging industry. The logging line was not a success, so after 5 years, it was decreed that the trains weren't needed any longer. That led to a problem. The expense involved in moving the obsolete trains out of the woods was prohibitive, and there was no reason for the logging companies to pay for it, as it wasn't their problem anymore. Without anyone willing to stump up for the cost, the trains were left where they stood, and they're still there today, 90 years later. If you follow the shore of Eagle Lake around, you'll also find a row of rail cars that were once attached to one of the trains, perched precariously on an embankment. This next train used to perform a very important duty in the United Kingdom. It belonged to the Royal Mail, and it ferried letters and parcels all over the country in its heyday. Now it's standing in a field in North Yorkshire, and it's covered in graffiti. It's been like this for 20 years. The long train, which still has all its carriages attached, is said to have been stuck in this part of Hellifield since at least 2002. The doors of the vehicle are stuck open, so anyone can climb aboard to take a look around, and quite a few people have. As we can see in these images, the driver's cabin has been stripped of most of its equipment, and the seat has seen better days. The curious thing here is that the train is still attached to the tracks, so the tracks must be every bit as abandoned as the train is. Otherwise, it would be getting in the way of other trains. Eagle-eyed train spotters have been able to identify this as a Class 44 Royal Mail good engine freight train, but there's no information anywhere about how it came to be forgotten. When Bolivia ordered a load of old steam trains from the United Kingdom in the early 20th century, it intended to use them as the starting point for a whole new train network. In the end, all they got was an accidental train graveyard. The trains are currently close to Uyuni on the Bolivian plains and are collectively known as Cementerio de Trains, literally the train cemetery. Uyuni was once an important railway connection point between many major South American cities, and the idea when buying the trains was to expand the station, add more lines, and add more services. Hundreds of trains were bought from the UK and shipped to Bolivia, but the Bolivian authorities then fell out with the contractors who were supposed to be building the expanded transport hub. Incredibly, neither side backed down, and the plan was abandoned, along with all of the expensive trains. They've been standing here unwanted ever since. The government was able to sell a few for scrap, but there are still more than 100 in the desert, getting battered by the region's notorious salt winds. When photos of this next train were posted on Reddit in May 2020, they provoked a lively debate among train enthusiasts. According to the original post, the photograph was taken at a secret location somewhere in Kazakhstan. The most upvoted response to the post claims that the train is an American locomotive company RSD-15, which can't possibly be in Kazakhstan because the company never made anything that would run on a Soviet rail gauge. The original poster stuck to their guns and is adamant that the abandoned train is in Kazakhstan. There are other anomalies here too. Look closely, and it appears that you can see people with high visibility jackets at the front of the train. Some people even say that the train has got its lights on, which would indicate it isn't abandoned at all. The original poster says the jackets are hung up and the lights aren't on, but frankly, we have no idea who to believe. Perhaps the number at the front holds all the clues. Apparently, the registration can be traced to a train running along Millrook Road in Negley, Ohio, which is the oldest continually used track in the United States of America. Well, we guess it's still significant, even if it isn't in Kazakhstan after all. There's no debating where this next rusty old train is. It's in Charlotte Valley, New York, USA. We can even tell you with certainty what it is. It's a GG1 electric-powered locomotive that was built by General Electric for Pennsylvania Railroad's Altoona Works. When it was no longer required for that purpose, it was bought by the Cooperstown and Charlotte Valley Heritage Railroad, where it should have enjoyed a pleasant retirement. But unfortunately, it was plucked away from that by Delaware Otsego to be used as a freight train once more. The last train on that line ran in 1987, and negotiations about the future of the line broke down permanently in 1995, by which time this poor old train had already been standing in situ for 8 years. It's doubtful it would have been possible to move it again by then anyway, and it will certainly never move again now. In more recent times, the Leatherstocking Railway Historical Society has taken ownership of the railway line. Restoring and repairing tracks and trains is a very slow job though, and it might be a few years before this veteran gets touched. The second largest city in Greece is Thessaloniki. It's known for its fine cuisine, museums, and beaches. It's not known for its enormous train cemetery, but perhaps it should be. There are literally thousands of old train cars stuck to the tracks on the fringes of the city, some of which have rotted away to almost nothing. Most of the trains have been here for several decades and are likely to remain where they are for several decades more. This is simply a dumping ground for the Hellenic Railways organization, which dumps obsolete units here whenever it sees fit. The official position of the government is that the trains are only here until they can be sold for scrap, but illegal scrap smuggling activity has probably already taken care of anything that might have been of value. That's why so many of the trains are barely more than shells. We guess the trains are stuck here until someone figures out a better idea for what to do with them. Surely this is a good opportunity to build a transport museum? Most of the exhibits you'd want for such a thing are already there. The Hungarian government is a little more protective over its train graveyard than Greece is over the one in Thessaloniki. In fact, the only way to get close to the Istvántelek train yard in the Hungarian capital of Budapest is with a formal permission document from the authorities. Perhaps that's because this place is also known as the Red Star Graveyard, on account of its connections to Hungary's communist past. In truth, both the site and the train inside it go back further in time than that. There's been a train repair yard here since the first decade of the 1900s, and the oldest of the trains is only about 10 years younger than that. It's even said by some that a few of the older locomotives were used by the Nazis to ferry Jewish prisoners to death camps, and then ended up here after the equipment was seized by the Soviets at the end of the war. That can't be proven, but it might explain why the Hungarians restrict access. Most of the trains, though, are undoubtedly Soviet in origin. A few of them even still have red stars on the front. We're not sure what this former Eurostar train did to deserve being dumped on the outskirts of Valenciennes, France, but it must have been bad. This train would have been incredibly expensive to make because it was built for a specialized job. It ran through the Channel Tunnel beneath the body of water that separates the United Kingdom from France and the European mainland. The tunnel was created as a cooperative project between the UK and France, and took 13,000 people a total of 6 years to complete, ending in 1994. The cost was $21 billion. The high-speed trains that run on the line can get you from London to Paris in 2 hours, and this was one of them. It's Eurostar 373018, and it was on the line from day one in 1994 until its retirement in 2016. The official records say that it's been in storage since its retirement date, but this doesn't look like storage to us. It looks a lot more like abandonment. Most of the Eurostar 373 class has since been scrapped, so maybe leaving this one out in the open is kinder by comparison. If you were to see the shattered remains of these trains standing in a field in Sylva, North Carolina, USA, you'd be likely to wonder how on earth they got there. You'd also wonder what kind of impact it would take to cause so much damage. And you'd presume that they must have been involved in a famous train crash. They were indeed involved in a famous crash, but strictly speaking, it wasn't a real one. The wreckage is a leftover from the filming of the movie version of The Fugitive in 1993. The script called for Richard Kimball's transport bus to be hit by a train, and CGI wasn't as great in the early 1990s as it is today. Rather than using models, the producers decided the best thing to do was literally crash a train into a bus. We guess the film had a big budget. The collision was filmed on an abandoned stretch of the Smoky Mountain Railroad, and the bus was hit so hard that it tore in half and derailed the train. Apparently, cleaning their mess up was too much to ask of the film crew. Having teased you with wreckage from a fake train crash, let's check out a real one. This is the Whistler train wreck, which, appropriately enough, is in Whistler, British Columbia, Canada. The wreckage seems somehow out of place, surrounded as it is by greenery and forest land. That's because the forest has had quite a long time to repair the damage caused by the crash and then grow around the wreck since it came off the rails in 1956. An investigation carried out at the time concluded that the train was overloaded and going twice the maximum speed limit for the track when it derailed. It's amazing that someone thought that going so much faster than the speed limit while already carrying too much cargo was a good idea. But it's even more amazing that nobody was hurt in the crash. The rain curled, which slowed the train down a little before it took off into the woodland. There's now an official hiking trail that takes you to the wreck, and since 2016, a suspension bridge to safely guide you across the railway line, which is still active. The next railroad we're going to visit is known by 3 nicknames, none of which are pleasant. Some call it the Dead Road, others call it the Road of Death, or the Railway of the Dead. Officially speaking, it's the Salakard-Igarka Railroad in Siberia. Of all the mistakes made by Joseph Stalin, this was the most costly and foolhardy. Stalin ordered 800 miles of railroad to be built here between 1949 and 1953, using enslaved prisoners as a workforce. Nobody knows how many prisoners died working on the line in the freezing cold, but it's thought to be several thousand. Stalin thought that building the line would make it easier for him to export nickel from Norilsk and provide Salakard with a better connection to the rest of the Russian railway network. He was probably right about that, but he failed to invest in the necessary machinery to do the work, and also refused to accept that building a railway through permafrost is virtually impossible. Work on the line only stopped because Stalin died, and his successor, Khrushchev, quietly abandoned the idea. Much of the track has since been lost to frost heaves, but there are still at least 11 old locomotives still trapped along the line. Vic Berry, a resident of Leicester, England, in the 1970s had an unusual job. He ran a scrapyard, and the scrapyard exclusively dealt with unwanted or obsolete trains. Most of the breaking work was carried out by Vic himself. Through either ambition or foolishness, Vic took on too much work. He accepted a contract to break up British Rail's Class 76 locomotives along with their carriages, and that alone caused an enormous backlog. By the time he was accepting Class 25s and Class 27s to go with them, he was forced to start making towers out of the abandoned trains just so they'd fit into the footprint of his yard. Not content with his stacks of regular trains, Vic started accepting London Underground trains and carriages for delivery from the yard, where he attempted to create a side business by refurbishing them and selling them back to railway preservation societies. Unfortunately, the old scrapyard isn't what it used to be. A large-scale fire, which always seemed inevitable, ripped through the yard in 1991 and caused a poisonous cloud of asbestos to form over Leicester. Some of the trains survived the fire, but the scrapyard never recovered financially and went out of business soon afterwards. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching and see you soon!